And I like to think I have big balls in a Stephen Colbert kind of cojones kind of way, But I'm not sure you can hide anything of substance. Oh, probably you can. I guess it's been tried. One of the things I learned about Saskatoon Correctional, and again, I'm going to stray onto all sorts of subject matter, but one day one of the inmates came and sat beside me. He'd just come back from somewhere, because it was unusual he was outside the prison. And I said, "Where have you been?" He said, "I went to see my dad lying in state. He's dead. He just died." And go, "Oh, really?" He said, "So was it a funeral?" And he says, "No. The funeral will be 8 hours away in L'Orange, where I'm from." He said, "They're not going to pay that kind of money to send me to my dad's funeral." So I saw him down at the morgue. So I said, "Oh, really?" And I said, "So how was that?" He said, "Well, here's my father. I didn't know him very well, but he's my father." I said, "Well, so what'd you feel?" He said, "Well, it's hard to feel anything," because he said, "I had my handcuffs on and the leg irons. So I'm standing before my dad's body with it." And I said, "What? You were in a morgue in leg irons and handcuffs?" Now, I've been in leg irons and handcuffs a lot myself. I'll tell you about that. But I said, "Oh, that's barbaric." I said, that's bad. And I'm steaming. I'm thinking, that's unjust. That's inhumane. That's some... And I'm looking at it. He said, "Man, as if anybody would ever do that, run away." And he looks at me. He said, "Well, actually, they used to not have people handcuffed and manacled, but 3 months ago, a guy did run away at his father's funeral." And I said, "Oh, really?" And there was that long silence, because earlier in that week, I'd spoke to the director of the prison, because whenever I felt indignant enough, I worked as a janitor for all the people who ran the prison. I think they kind of were entertained by that. But I also outdid them. I made that the cleanest prison administration center ever. They all admitted it. The place was most spotless, and they missed me when I was gone. I've heard that since. But anyway, every now and then I would get the nerve up to ask very politely, because he runs the prison. I'm not going to be arrogant in front of him, but ask him what justifies some of these crazy rules. And he said to me, "Well, Mark, this prison was built in 1976, and we didn't have any rules. Every single rule you think is maddening arose because a circumstance arose that there was no rule. And so we had to make a rule." So I remembered, and at the time I thought, yeah, but these are crazy rules. So I also learned there's two sides to everything. Yes, it's inhumane to see your father in a morgue with handcuffs on. And then the prison director said, "But then somebody ran away. So what do you do?" So I learned there's two sides to lots of things, and I learned a lot about myself in jail. I will say this, the 67 days I spent in Saskatoon Correctional, and many of the jails I've been, were sometimes the greatest times of my life. I learned more. I had great epiphanies. I had a tremendous sense of good feeling towards my fellow human beings. Because a lot of the people who were inmates, they were people who never had a chance. They never had a chance. One of the things, because they didn't have a father around, and that kind of set them off in a certain direction for their whole life. One of the things I did with that $4 million we gave away from 1995 to 2005 was I started a drug addiction clinic. Because there are a lot of drug addicts everywhere, and I feel bad for them. Because one thing I know now is it's not really their fault, and nobody's having fun being a drug addict. People think, "Oh, you just want to get high, you just want to be responsible." Every drug addict I treated was one of the most miserable persons I've ever met. I felt terribly sorry for them. Because as I dealt with them, I used to give them this incredible extract from an African plant called the iboga plant, and it was called ibogaine hydrochloride, and it stops drug addiction right away, drug withdrawal and drug craving of any drug. Now, it only lasts so long, 3 or 4 weeks, and if you go back into your old milieu or your old neighborhood with your old friends, you're going to become a drug addict once again. If you really need to get rid of it, stop a substance that you're abusing, you have to change everything about your life. It's really, really difficult. First of all, I would give you ibogaine hydrochloride, and it actually resets the brain and resets the body, as though you're all clear. And you have these incredible visions about your childhood. And you go through stuff, and you go through a real cleansing and a purging, and you come out really quite optimistic about life, totally clean, and for the first time perhaps in a decade or two, you're totally not craving drugs. And one of the things I asked before I treat each one is, I said, "Well, where'd you grow up?" And somebody would say, "Oh, I grew up in Canton, Ohio." But these are people from all over North America. And there's a segment in the national news. The National on CBC did a day following me and my patients and the remarkable work we were doing. And I paid for everything about it. I paid each patient cost about $3,000 to $4,000, and I would treat them all personally, as well as hire a staff of 4 to keep them totally comfortable and do everything. It's really labor intensive to look after one person who's going to get through a drug addiction. They would each stay with us for 4 to 10 days. And I would ask them, "Where you're from?" And then I'd say, "So what was life growing up with your mother or father?" And you know what's really fascinating? The only commonality to drug addiction I ever found was this, is that every single one of them, excepting 4, 61 out of 65 of those patients did not have their biological father in their life for all or part of their childhood. There was no other commonality. And additionally, every single one of them had a mother who was in their life, but it didn't seem to be as big a factor, even though mothers do 90% of the child rearing. That 10% that comes from the biological male is so utterly vital. And if the father isn't there, And I heard everything. Oh, well, where was your father, I would say, or how was life with your father when person's there? I never knew. He wasn't there after age 2. Or he was in jail till I was 6. Or he was in the military. Or my parents separated. And this is the most common just before puberty. My parents split up. Thought that was very fascinating. Because what every single one of these people did, who didn't have their biological father in their life for a substantial part of their life, was that they immediately sort of acted out after puberty, got angry, hung out with the wrong people, other angry young people, started, mother couldn't control them, mother was working to try and pay for everything, couldn't look after them, and the kids became hellions and got into trouble. And then they found a drug that finally took away the pain, at least temporarily, of the fact that they had felt abandoned, and it was their fault, and all the different things people think when your father runs off. So that was the one kind of revelation I had after a year and a half of treating hardcore drug addicts, is that every one of them was traceable to the fact that that father had buggered off or wasn't there. Because you know what? I did not ever meet, and to this day I've still not found one, anybody who has smoked cigarettes, alcohol, to an abusive degree, or any other drug to an abusive degree. I have never yet found one person who said, well, no, actually my dad was always he was an awesome guy, they were terrific to me, they were like totally supportive, and then one day I went to a party when I was 19 and I put a needle in my arm. No, I've never heard it. I've never heard it. I know you're not supposed to say absolutes, but I've simply never heard it. If you've got 2 loving parents who are always there, you are going to grow up happy, confident, like I am. I don't know anything about. I was listening to people tell me stories over and over. I hear this in every jail I've ever been to, in every place, when people confess to me everywhere, and they confess to me everywhere, whatever it is, their medical position, and then things. I mean, people even tell me about crimes they didn't get convicted of in jail. I don't know what their kids would come to see them, they'd come to me and say, I've got to stop this lifestyle. I can't let my kids see me in jail like this. And I go, very good thought. Now, how can we move forward with these ideas, right? And stuff like that. And so people, they were all confessing me. These people, because I paid for them, had no reason to lie to me. There was nothing I wanted from them. I just want you to take this substance and see how it works, because I think it's going to be really helpful to you. And of course, it was very helpful to them. But I thought, what a terrible tragedy. Because one woman who was a heroin addict, when I treated her, and I asked her, after we had treated her, and I wanted her to sweat some more in a bathtub, and I had to escort her there, and as I put her body in, I realized, oh my God, you've got cuts over your entire body, like big gaping cuts and razor blade cuts. And that, I don't know what had happened, but it was just so frightening. I went back and nearly fainted, because she was covered with over 150 marks and cuts that had somehow happened as she lived off and on the street in Seattle for the last 10 years. And originally she would have been a very pretty, elegant young lady. But I saw her entire body from her neck down covered in these scars and cuts everywhere, and wondered what kind of lifestyle was this, right? And first of all, men out here, just my segue, we'll get back to marijuana, but this is what I spent $250,000 of the money people spend running this drug addiction clinic, learning from people, like I learned from people in jail, like I learned from people everywhere. Don't ever underestimate your responsibility to a free society and to your children. When you have children, guys, please do never abandon them. I found that is the strongest impetus to drug addiction and substance abuse that there is the abandonment of the children by their fathers who bugger off and pursue other interests. Never underestimate your impact as a father. That's only, and you know what, in a way, I've always been kind of a bleeding heart liberal. I still am a libertarian with bleeding heart liberal sentimentalities, but that really threw me for a loop. People, when they have rancorous splitting up between parents, that has an unbelievably devastating effect on both young men and women. I mean, after the age of 16 and 17, it's not really a relevant factor, but young people are so sensitive at age 10, 11. Kurt Cobain, heroin addict, killed himself, and his heroin addiction was largely the fact that he never reconciled his parents splitting up. It drove him nuts. He used to scrawl on the wall, "Mommy hates Daddy, Daddy hates Mommy," and it ate him up inside, such that he couldn't even kill the pain with heroin. He wanted to finish his life because of the pain. I mean, that's an extreme example. And by the way, there's no absolute. Sometimes you get 2 children, one becomes a drug abuser and the other one's perfectly normal, and they have the same parents. And we know all this example. If you have siblings, some of them had problems you didn't have, and yet sometimes they blame the parents. You say, but we both grew up in the same house and the same parent, and I don't have this problem, you have this problem, so whose problem is it? Well, I can tell you, though, I did not find a single person, and I've never to this day found someone, when I really investigated, who ever had a drug abuse problem of any kind, who had 2 loving parents who were always there for them up to the age of 16. So never underestimate your impact as a human being on our free society. Never underestimate the impact you can have as a parent, as a brother.